Hello Year 11. So we're now moving on to part 3 of the Norman course. So we've had the first couple of parts. We've looked at the conquest of William the Conqueror. We've looked at life under the Normans on a day-to-day basis. And now we're moving on to the final part, which is looking at religion. So religion is hugely important, and we're looking at how the Normans influenced religion in England and what they changed, and especially looking at the relationship of our different kings with the Pope. So religion was massively important, as I've said. It was massively important in the Anglo-Saxon times. So when the Normans arrived, they need to make sure they have a good religious footing. In the Anglo-Saxon times, religion was very, very important. People believed that those kings were chosen by divine right, so God chose the kings of England. They also believed in Judgment Day, so you're living a good life, you would face judgment on whether you would get to heaven, or purgatory, or hell. People in Anglo-Saxon England also followed the ideas of the priest. Priest is probably the most important person in a village, in a town, spreading a message. That's where people heard what was going on. All their key messages came from the church and from their priest. And obviously the most important person in the eyes of many of the Anglo-Saxons was the Pope. So we've got those important things, and they're things that the Normans have to take into account when they come into England, but also they have to take into account the problems with the church. Despite Anglo-Saxon people being very, very religious, there are some problems with the way the church was run in England. We have the problem of pluralism. That's people in church positions, bishops for example, holding various key positions, which means they can't do their job effectively. If you were to think of a football manager that was a manager of 2 different clubs, they wouldn't be able to manage both of them as well as if they were just managing one of them. So pluralism was a problem in the church. We also had the problem of simony. Simony is the idea that you can pay for a certain role. So you give the king a bit of money, almost like a bribe, and they give you an important position in the church, which you can then gain all the benefits from having land or collecting taxes from the church. We also have the idea of nepotism. That's people in high positions giving important positions in the church to their friends or their family. And we have the fact that priests and monks weren't necessarily living the best life, living the life that a monk or a priest was supposed to live. The best example of that is the fact that many monks were making a lot of money from the church, and many priests were getting married, and that was breaking their vow of celibacy. So there was lots of problems with the Anglo-Saxon church, and that leads us to William's invasion. William invades for various reasons, but religion is one of the reasons he invades. It's a religious crusade. We know that from the first video on the Normans, where he got the papal banner. The Pope had given the approval for William to invade England. So that papal banner was the Pope saying, I believe you can change the religion of the country. And therefore William invades England on the premise that he's going to improve the religion of England. So he needs to fix this idea of pluralism, he needs to stop simony, he needs to stop nepotism, and he wants to make priests and monks live the life that they are supposed to, the oaths or what they promised to do. So how is he going to achieve this? He relies heavily, William the Conqueror relies heavily on his Archbishop of Canterbury, Lanfranc. Lanfranc had actually secured the papal banner for William for the invasion, for the Battle of Hastings. So Lanfranc makes several reforms, and for your exam you need to know his reforms. You could get a question asking you what was important about his reforms, or what were his reforms. So what did he do? We had the idea of setting up of synods, S-Y-N-O-D-S. Synods are church councils. This is several people involved in a certain area. They talk about church matters and areas for the local area. So church councils were important. There was a church hierarchy created, obviously starting with the Pope at the top, moving down to archbishops, bishops, archdeacons, deans and parish priests. The idea that you had this hierarchy of the chain of command almost, the important message coming from the Pope being passed down to several important people, and then spreading that news until you get to the priests in the local villages. Spreading that news that's come from the top, getting your position and keeping your position by staying loyal and following the message from those above you. That hierarchy made sure that things were spread, information or news or religious practice was shared better and was much improved. We also have the idea that parish priests were given much more importance. There was lots more of them in villages, again using that idea of word of mouth, priests spreading the religious message. We also have the fact that cathedrals were moved to towns and cities, so the biggest churches were moved or were rebuilt in towns and cities. Cathedrals became a focal point for the major places in England. Again, that shows you Norman importance, but that also allowed for more administration in those cathedrals, and they became the centre of Norman expansion. We also have the fact that marriage was completely banned, so there was much stricter rules on that, and it was kind of a reaffirming of that rule of celibacy. And also the practices of simony and nepotism are stopped. You can no longer sell positions, you can no longer have several jobs with pluralism, and you can't give jobs to your family or friends. So Lanfranc brings in those reforms to make things stricter. The idea of those reforms is they're going to make the church work better, be more religious, and also, if you can do that, the people are going to be on side. If you can make religion the focal point of people's lives again, and it's being practiced properly, then actually you can gain more supporters. Another reform that I didn't mention there was the idea of church courts. So in the previous video I talked about the different types of court where you could be trialled, while the church courts were completely separate. So Lanfranc argued that religious people should be trialled in bishop courts. So they do not have the same kind of trials as the regular man on the street. Now, the importance of that was showing you just how important the Normans thought religion was, that they have their own separate courts. They shouldn't be facing the same trials and the same punishments. Again, placing that importance on religion. So religious people were trialled in bishops' courts, as well as just normal people who were facing religious charges like blasphemy. One other aspect that Lanfranc brought in was that rebuilding of churches and cathedrals, and buildings that were developed. So a lot of the old Anglo-Saxon churches and cathedrals are knocked down and rebuilt. Rebuilt out of stone and rebuilt in the Norman Romanesque style. So fancy arches, new designs, the most elaborate kind of churches you could think of, much different to the Anglo-Saxons. And that had a few purposes. First of all, it was built by a lot of English people with free labour, which showed the Norman power. But also the fact that you're building these huge, magnificent cathedrals out of stone shows how important the Normans thought religion was, shows you their power, shows you their wealth, and it's showing to the people not only are we very, very religious, look at these buildings, but also we are in charge and look how much power we have. You can also think about how these churches were an idea that God was giving his support to the Normans. We then move on, the last thing I really want to, there's two more things I need to talk about with churches. The first one is the relationships of our kings. So I've given you the reforms, the big changes, and they exist for a lot of the Norman times. But actually, what about our different kings? What's their relationship like with the church? Are they all brilliantly religious and making massive changes, or is there some faults? So William I, William the Conqueror, has a very good relationship with the church. He's a very religious man. He has that reputation, hence why Lanfranc was able to get the papal banner. He supports church reforms, and those reforms by Lanfranc are made because William's a firm supporter and believes he's doing his religious duty in England. And he has a very good relationship with the Pope, especially Pope Alexander, who'd given him the papal banner. That relationship stays strong for most of William the Conqueror's rule, apart from a little dodgy part right at the end with the next Pope after Alexander, Pope Gregory. But we don't need to know too much about that. We know that William the Conqueror has a very good relationship with the church. We then get to William II, his son, William Rufus, as he'd been known. So William II or William Rufus, however you want to refer to him. What was his relationship like? Not as good. Not a very religious man. Religion is not seen as important for William Rufus. He believes in making money from the church. We can definitely see that through his rule. He reintroduces the idea of simony, so it's removed by William the Conqueror, but William Rufus brings it back. The best example is the Bishop of Durham, Ranulph Flambard, were paid for his position, and it's one of the most important positions in England, the Bishop of Durham. So that practice is coming back. And he's also seen to have a lack of morals. He's accused, he doesn't have a wife, he's accused of homosexuality, and he is not seen to have very good morals by the church. That can be seen with the trial of a bishop called William St. Calais, who was previously the bishop of, another bishop of Durham. William St. Calais is trialled for treason. Basically, he knew about a plot to try and overthrow William II. He warns him, but then doesn't provide troops. He's accused of treason. Now, he should be tried in a bishop or a church court. However, William Rufus has him trialled in a normal court, the King's Court. And with that, that shows you that there wasn't importance of religion. Remember, church courts were supposed to say religion is very different from normal people. Well, William Rufus was saying, no, this goes under normal people's court or a secular court. This is what it's going to be, and that shows you where William Rufus's priorities perhaps were. We look at his relationship with the popes, the different popes. Not very good. The best example of that is when he refuses to let his archbishop, a guy called Anselm, A-N-S-E-L-M, travel to Rome to get to be sworn in as archbishop by the Pope and get kind of permission to be the Archbishop of England, where he would swear loyalty to the Pope. William Rufus refuses that, and there's this big debate where he's refusing to let Anselm go. It's all settled in 1095 with the Council of Rockingham. The Council of Rockingham basically is an agreement between the Pope and William Rufus to stay out of each other's affairs. If you've got a king doing that with the Pope at this very religious time, that just shows you how negative their relationship was. We then have the next Norman King of England, Henry I. Henry I, very up and down relationship with the popes. The example of one bit of controversy was where Archbishop Anselm again is asking to be granted his or invested as bishop. Again, we have a new king, and there is this fallout between the Pope and Henry. Henry says that loyalty must be given to him first before the Pope. Anselm disagrees with this. The Pope actually threatens to excommunicate, that's kick Henry out of the church. Eventually they come to an agreement again that the main power, or the main religious power, is given by the Pope. However, loyalty must be sworn to Henry as well. It's called the investiture controversy. You don't need to know too much about it, you just need to know that there was that dodgy relationship. The last thing to do with religion is monasteries. Monasteries are massively important in medieval life, in the Norman times. Monasteries were those religious centres, those centres which people relied on as hospitals, as centres of learning, as centres of worship, places where people, the most religious people, would live and spread the message and spend their day preparing the message for the local population. Those religious centres, if you were a monk living in the monastery, you had a really simple life. No meat, 8 church services a day, no talking, self-sustaining, very, very simple life. Like I said, no talking, and really religious, pious life. Quite boring for many people, you're probably thinking, but it was supposed to be your life is sworn to religion. The monasteries, though, under Anglo-Saxon times, had been perhaps breaking a lot of those vows, making more money than they should have done, and perhaps some monks breaking the rules. So the Normans brought in reforms, again, showing you how important they find religion. We need to change these dodgy monasteries. So they bring in new services from Europe to try and bring them more in line, so that they're following some of the rules from like Rome and from France. Stricter rules are brought back in, they're following the Benedictine order. These strict rules are reaffirmed and put in place, and people lose their positions of power if they're not following those rules. We even have Cluniac monasteries, which are even stricter than some of the things we've already mentioned before, and there's over 30 of those created in England that's brought over from France, so an influence from France is brought over to have really, really strict monasteries. And we have a lot of the monasteries run by Normans, again, showing you Norman power. And finally, what else are the